Welcome to Going Underground with me, Afshin Rattansi. Every Monday, Wednesday and Saturday, we bring you the stories that really matter in the UK, for those of you tired of the mainstream and wishing to question more. In today's show, David Cameron is slammed by human rights groups over the actions of GCHQ. We look at how damaging Snowden's revelations have been to the UK's image abroad, and cutting the legal aid budget. But at what cost? A top lawyer says the whole justice system needs an overhaul. Plus, Simon Cowell's in bed with the Israeli Defense Forces. For these stories and more, let's go underground. While world leaders from German Chancellor Merkel to Brazilian President Rousseff to French President Hollande complain about American bugging, here in Britain the response is much more quiet. Now, 70 of the world's leading human rights organizations from 40 countries have written to Prime Minister David Cameron to address the issues raised by the Edward Snowden revelations. They warn that the British government's response and the pressure it has placed on media covering the leaks is eroding fundamental human rights in the country. The letter draws attention to the detention at Heathrow Airport of the partner of the journalist who first wrote up the revelations in The Guardian. You'll remember that security services raided the offices of The Guardian to destroy computers. And since then, David Cameron has issued a veiled threat against any newspaper covering the story, saying that if they don't demonstrate some social responsibility, it would be very difficult for the government to stand back and not act. How come Britain is reacting so differently to blanket US surveillance that has caused outrage around the world? With me is the roving correspondent of the Asia Times, Pepe Escobar. Pepe, welcome to Going Underground.
You've, always underground.
Of course. And you've been far away in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I'm a new kind of boat people. I just arrived by boat from Shanghai directly over the
We'll get on
River.
to immigration border control in a second.
No border controls.
How are they following the NSA spying revelations from Edward Snowden in Southeast Asia? Because it's making the Chinese press, and Britain hasn't said anything. It's the only country not
Look,
to.
the Chinese press, Xinhua Agency, the China Daily, the People's Daily, they cover it on an everyday basis carefully. And it's not only the usual Reuters or AP report. They have their own writers about it, obviously sanctioned, of course, and editorials. And the editorials are ultra hardcore. I'm sure everybody remembers the Xinhua editorial about 2 weeks ago calling for a de-Americanized world. This was the NSA revelations and much else. The non-trip by Obama to the APEC summit.
Arguably, it's not just China, of course, because European press articles are full of things against.
On their Spiegel,
but in
for
Britain,
instance.
in this country, what are they saying about Britain?
Well, it's the special relationship, in fact. The way it's seen, I would say, the way it's seen in Beijing, in Moscow, and in the big capitals in South America, very important, the way it's seen in Brasilia and in Buenos Aires. Yes, there is a special relationship, but it's a poodle relationship. Because even the other ones who are not so special, France, Italy, Spain, they are making waves, and even Germany. Angela Merkel was absolutely furious with what happened. Just as furious as Dilma, the president of Brazil, when the revelations exploded about Brazil over a month ago. So everywhere, everybody's furious. But in England, you know, it's wonderful. It's like they're watching Chelsea and Manchester United, you know, very well behaved in a soccer stadium.
American-owned teams, I think. I was reading that.
Exactly, American and Russian.
But so the government, the Cameron government, may not be saying much about it, apart from veiled criticism of the idea, the very idea of someone like Edward Snowden existing. But of course the law enforcement hasn't. And that Brazilian partner of Glenn Greenwald stopped.
Exactly, but the thing is, the Brazilian partner of Greenwald, he was not carrying everything really sensitive. First of all, he took a flight, an internal flight in Europe, with a stop in Heathrow to fly to Brazil. This is completely absurd. You can fly from any major capital in Europe straight to Rio and São Paulo.
Obviously, what I meant was, the British authorities may not be saying anything, the politicians, but obviously they're doing that. They're going into The Guardian to destroy laptops. I know you're trying to give tips to the MI5 to how to get the information. But what do you think of that? How is that seen abroad? Because people aren't trying to stop the revelations in France or Germany
the way
or
it's
Spain
seen,
or Italy.
the way it's seen in the big players that really matter, Beijing and Moscow. It's a bit of James Bond doing the Three Stooges. This is how it's seen, you know. Obviously, in the Russian press, this is very calculated, coming from the top as well. Let's not, you know, get the dagger and keep on, you know. In the Chinese press, it's no holds barred, in fact. And in the Hong Kong press, which is even freer than the Chinese press, if you read the South China Morning Post, virtually every day there's a news story about the post-Snowden revelations. Don't forget that this all started in Hong Kong. I was there at the time, in fact. Snowden was in a hotel not far from where I live. And we knew what was happening while he was there. He was being followed by Chinese intelligence. So extremely carefully, of course. Nobody knew. It was very hush-hush. He was talking to Hong Kong authorities, to Chinese intelligence, and at the same time there was a back-channel connection between Beijing and Moscow. That's why he took a flight from Hong Kong straight to Moscow, because the Russians knew it, the Chinese knew it, and the Hong Kong authorities, they just approved it legally. By the way, everything was done by the book.
But that was what was so suspicious, according to the British media, because they were saying, you see, the Russians are involved, the Chinese are involved.
No, it's not that the Russians are involved.
This is how it was
the Russians,
Over there,
exactly.
they're saying it's the British that are actually the suspicious ones for smashing up laptops and so on.
Exactly. In fact, the British are seen as suspicious in terms of an extension of the NSA. It's part of the famous Anglo-American Orwellian panopticon complex, which is global, and it's basically English-speaking countries. This is seen by Russians, Chinese, the Latin-speaking world, the Spanish-speaking world, not in terms of a conspiracy, but look, this is their club. They run their club. It's only 5 members. Nobody else is admitted. Even if you are fluent in English, or even if you live in the English-speaking world, or even if you traffic information inside the English-speaking world, but it's their own, it's like a British gentleman's club. It's exactly the same principle. Okay. And obviously they share intelligence among themselves, but they don't share it. The ultra-sensitive part is not shared with Spain, with Germany, not to mention with the East.
Well, about that sharing, you said there was a poodle. They said 35 world leaders. We don't know all the world leaders' names. Do you think it's possible that the poodle itself was being bugged? That the NSA were bugging Cameron?
Look, even if they were, this is not essential, because the Americans know everything that is going on here. It's the same thing with Israel. Almost everything that happens in Israel, everything that happens in Israel, the Americans know it. It's not the other way around. Everything that happens in
Britain, then why does Obama do the photo calls
everything
with
that happens in
Netanyahu?
Britain, the Americans know it, but not the other way around. This is how it works. You know.
How damaged is Britain's reputation? You seem to be saying, over in Southeast Asia, the BRICS countries, the powers of the next century or this century. Anyway, Britain was considered a poodle. Do you think it's further damaged by the revelations?
Absolutely, position? Because there's no reaction. For instance, they cover. When Dilma, the president of Brazil, canceled a state visit to Washington because of the revelations, this went all over the developing world. I'm talking about the non-aligned movement, even all around the Middle East, including American satellites. Everybody was reporting it. With Merkel, the same thing. Even a Hollande, which, 26% approval rate, he's an inefficient, incompetent president, but still he said something. And Britain, obviously, total silence. So this is interpreted all over the non-allied movement and all over the developing world, all over the South as a whole, as, the poodle is not singing. Again.
So that's obviously going to be damaging. What other ways do you think it's going to damage Britain's place in the world?
I don't see economic damage. For instance, Boris Johnson was in Beijing a few days ago. It was a major success, super PR.
He's come out, I have to say, in favor of the Guardian's leak of the revelations against his own party leader.
Don't forget that this was also reported in China, by the way. This just added a little bit more to this astounding PR success in Beijing. You know, riding the metro. Do you see a haute fonctionnaire of the Chinese Communist Party taking the metro in Beijing? Never. You know, riding a bicycle, everything. He did everything right. He sold London. It's completely, he didn't sell Britain.
And who's to say,
he
if Boris was in power,
It's different.
maybe he'd still keep GCHQ spying on the British and European population.
Oh yeah,
for America.
Exactly. So, you know, in fact, Western Europe nowadays, it's not as advanced in terms of internal spying in America, where I already see it as a completely 100% Orwellian panopticon security military media complex. It's already installed and it's already working. And Europe is going the same way. Western Europe is going the same way. Some countries more advanced than others. I would say Britain more advanced than continental Europe.
You frightened when you come to Britain, finally?
No, not at all. I'm extremely well treated every time I come here.
Be frightened?
They say welcome, baby. They see that I'm a journalist. They say welcome back. Who are you going to talk to? You know, it's different. But I
Should
know
our viewers be frightened?
I know a lot of people who come here, and the grilling is really hardcore. If you are a Muslim from Somalia, from Iran, from Syria, from northern Iraq, even from Pakistan, it's really hardcore, and it's very unfair. This used to be a benign empire, may I say.
I'm not sure many millions of people would agree on you.
Exactly, but not anymore. Not even the facade, you know, the whole Damascus has fallen, I would say.
Pepe Escobar, thank you for going underground.
Thank you.
Ever found yourself in court with the urge to say, aha, or worried about the fact the judge isn't really listening to what you're saying? We've got some handy tips for you in part 2 of Going Underground, courtesy of the Bar Council. The number of divorces filed rose in March 2013 ahead of the legal aid cuts in April. But if you didn't have time to ditch your spouse and cannot afford a top-notch lawyer, fear not. The Bar Council has published a guide to representing yourself in court. The 70-odd page guide is full of helpful tips and breaks down the legal jargon into simple English for anyone unfamiliar with the inside of a courtroom. In fact, the Bar Council is so intent on helping the people of Britain, they haven't missed an opportunity to give helpful advice. We count down our favorite tips from their handy guide. At number 8, if your lawyer advises you that your case is weak, don't argue about it and think that you know better. Advice from a friend or from something you read in a newspaper is not as reliable as professional legal advice. At number 7, whoever has made the claim in court has to persuade the judge that what they are saying is true. This earth-shattering piece of information is accompanied by further key advice. There can be very serious consequences if you deliberately lie or even bend the truth. At number 6, when you come to fill out your claim form, you should identify the full name of each party and state whether they are the claimant or the defendant. Didn't know that, did you? At number 5, make sure that all of your witnesses have arrived. It's apparently very awkward if they don't all turn up. At number 4, throughout the hearing, use simple, non-legal language as much as you can. Speak in short sentences. You might be tempted to speak like lawyers speak on television. Resist this temptation. Lawyers do not really speak like that. And while you're using your simple, non-legal English, think of considering the judge. A good way to make sure that the judge is keeping up is to keep an eye on their pen. At number 3, if you have a question to ask, just say to the judge, "Excuse me, sir or madam, may I ask a question?" At number 2, when the witness has given their answer, move on. It can be tempting to say, "Aha," or "That's right." Remember, you're only supposed to be putting your case. And our favorite tip on the conclusion of a case, when judgment is given, make sure you understand it. Some judges give long judgments and you may be unsure of the most important part. If you do not understand what the judge has decided, ask him or her. A brilliant top tip, I'm sure you'll agree. Since the coalition government's legal aid reforms were introduced in April 2013, Law centres across the country have been forced to shut doors, cut staff and turn away clients. The reforms indicate a projected saving of £455 million by 2015-2016 and further reductions of £220 million a year from the criminal legal aid budget are hoped for by 2018-2019. Now, the government will only help you to pay for a lawyer if you are at immediate risk of losing your home or subject to domestic abuse. Even prior to these new reforms, having a full-time job on the minimum wage was not enough to guarantee that you'd get legal aid, with the government still demanding a full assessment of your income and outgoings. It'll get even harder to get any help to fight your case if you own part of your home and you have a problem ranging from employment, debt and education to immigration and welfare. Under the reforms, lawyers will also be given financial incentives for clients who plead guilty early and could lose money if cases go to trial. Anthony Handel is the head of the Centre for Justice. He joins me now. Welcome to Going Underground, Anthony. Hundreds of millions will be taken out of the legal aid budget. You want reform. Great day then for justice, the fact that the coalition government has decided this.
Well, times of austerity give you an opportunity to look at the whole system and to look at change. And we think it is a time for change. We think there are wonderful opportunities now for the legal profession and for the judicial system, for the country, to actually review how you deliver justice.
But for all your optimism that there is a chance for change because of the austerity times that we live in, what are the circumstances for litigants who don't have that much cash at the moment in Britain?
Dire. The situation is very, very dire, serious. If you see people going through the courts who come out the other end, you know, the financial consequences, the bankruptcies, the family breakup that comes out of problems when they're either unresolved because people can't access the courts and therefore there is no solution to that problem, they just end there frustrated, exasperated and desperate. Or they go through and things go wrong or they can't afford it. The financial consequences can be very, very grave, but the health consequences are also very grave. You know, the mental breakdown, I mean, you see people committing suicide as a result of court cases, even just giving evidence. You've probably seen a number of cases where just the stress of giving evidence in our present system leaves people so undermined and depressed that, you know, even suicide is possible. But the health and mental health problems for people who can't access justice, who can't sort out their problems, who are left, you know, on the cusp, who are completely alienated.
That means testing is getting more and more part of British government policy. You support it?
Well, no, because I think the difficulty here is that the levels are getting to such, that you're operating at such a low level that very, very few people can access justice. So even if you do qualify for legal aid, you may well find that you have to repay through a statutory charges charged on your property or over a period of time. So there are fewer and fewer people who are entitled to it financially, so the financial eligibility criteria are getting tighter, fewer people are qualifying, and certainly in civil legal aid there are fewer and fewer areas which are actually within scope, areas which are actually covered. So a lot of cases people do not get legal aid, they have no access to justice at all. Specifically,
is it better to own a house, some equity in a house, for fear of losing it so you get the legal aid, rather than be poor and rent?
Well, anybody with any assets is going to find themselves almost certainly, the levels are so low that anybody with any significant savings, I mean we're talking about thousands, not tens of thousands, are going to be outside the scope of
What do the judges and lawyers that you talk to think about this? When they see people that are very poor, who have no chance of legal justice?
The senior judiciary, former Master Judge, now President of the Supreme Court, and other senior judges are all saying, we face a serious problem. We're talking about potential social unrest, you know, bricks through windows, all these sort of issues, if people do not have a means to get to court or there isn't a viable alternative. And we're obviously stressing the viable alternative within the court system rather than the old traditional adversarial system. But whichever route you're taking, people do not have the right to go to justice.
But the Ministry of Justice, there are people at the Ministry of Justice that surely realise that. Why do you think they just sign off then on, right, cut legal aid further?
There isn't any obvious reason, except they're trying to find ways of saving money. And it is completely wrong that the judicial system, where people's rights, which are actually fundamental to their ability to live and to work, are at threat. If somebody's made unemployed and they've got no way of getting reinstatement or getting compensation because they have no access, and that's one of the areas that has gone with the recent cuts. You can't pursue your claims anymore. There are a lot of people who are actually in a very, very desperate situation. They were before, because dispute by itself is damaging, and what we want to see is better ways of resolving disputes. But if you can't even get to court, then you are left, as I said before, the senior judiciary recognises, and they see that the social unrest, the disharmony, and the damage that's done to individuals and to their communities when there is nowhere to go to sort out their problems. It's a very bleak future we have.
Is it a kind of social engineering? I understand the divorce rate went up before new legal aid cuts came into force. Obviously, people are having to rearrange their lives, realizing they aren't going to get restitution in family cases, immigration cases, debt cases, because of these cuts, because they can't afford it.
Well, I don't think it's as deliberate as that. I don't think that the government says let's try and make people's lives more miserable.
It's just incompetent.
It's a combination of lack of, as I said before, joined up thinking, and having to make cuts without actually really working out the best way to do it, and working out how to repair the damage that isn't automatically or necessarily going to follow from those cuts. There are ways to repair the damage or limit it. Those measures are not being taken, and that's why we want to work with the government to try and help them to understand where they can limit the damage, or even find better ways, maybe even put us back to where we were before, or even possibly even better. But unless they do that, then the future is very bleak, and I think we have deep cause for pessimism unless we take the opportunity. Because I say it is an opportunity. When things are as bad as this, in times of austerity, those are times when actually you have the opportunity to stand back and say, this is so serious, we've got to do something about it.
So you think that's the main idea in their heads? Mr. Grayling, the minister, he's thinking of that? Or is he just thinking of cutting budgets? Because it's the Ministry of Justice that is cutting out of any of the departments the hardest proportionately than any other departments.
I don't think that's in his mind, no. I think, but he is creating the opportunity by opening up the debate and making it necessary for us to discuss, okay, what are we doing now? How do we go forward with even fewer people able to get access to justice? We now have to look at the alternatives. We have to accept that the system wasn't working. These are systemic issues. There are fundamental problems which go beyond funding. So we can stand back and actually look at the system and say, is there a more efficient, better, more reliable way of providing and delivering justice to the community?
Well, aside from the philosophical underpinnings of the British justice system, competitive tendering is how he thinks efficiency, savings and efficiency can benefit the legal system here.
Well, I would say he's looking in the wrong direction, because he's tinkering with the existing system, and I think we actually have to work with the system to improve it, to find ways of making that system more efficient and more reliable, reducing the cost so that actually we can provide a system which is affordable for everyone. So
you don't think G4S, Stobart lorries, bringing in these private companies will reduce costs for legal aid and potentially allow more people to get legal aid?
I think that's irrelevant. I think, bringing in outsourcing, private tendering, they're looking in the wrong direction. The real issue is, how does the system work? How do you make the system more efficient? And that is probably centres around the adversarial nature of the process we have at the moment.
Thank you very much, Anthony Hunt.
A pleasure. A pleasure.
Millions tune in every week to pop music talent contest, The X Factor. But it turns out Simon Cowell, original judge and TV's Mr. Nasty, has several reasons for needing the show to be lucrative. It seems he needs to pay the bills of the Israeli army. When you call the X Factor number, you're helping Simon donate money to the Israeli Defense Forces. They're the ones aiding the illegal settlements condemned by the United Nations. At one event hosted by the American Friends of the IDF, the offer of a £600,000 donation was enough to coax Cowell into singing the Power Rangers theme tune. Simon then donated about £160,000 of his own money to the IDF to be allowed to stop singing. Join us next time as we go underground to bring you the latest beneath the mainstream from around the UK. Don't forget, you can drop us a line on Twitter at underground_RT, like our page on Facebook, or email us goingunderground@rttv.co.uk. See you on Saturday.